So you've decided that you want to buy your first short-term rental, but where are you going to buy it? It's a big question, right? Well, in this video, I'm going to dive into how to identify a strong market to invest in with a short-term rental, because this is a huge deal. If you pick a poor market, then you're starting out with the cards stacked against you, and it may be difficult, if not impossible, to succeed over time. So this is an important decision. And if you stay to the end, I'm going to talk about one thing that I don't hear a whole lot of other people talking about that I think is important for you to really consider when you're picking a market. So I'm going to talk about 4 things that are important for you to think about when investing in a short-term rental market. So let's go. Number 1 is local laws and regulations. This is key because it will dictate whether or not you can run a short-term rental at all in that market. As a matter of fact, there are many cities around the country, most notably New York City and Dallas, where it used to be pretty short-term rental friendly, but have recently banned short-term rentals outright, and you don't want to be part of that. Now, we tend to see more stringent regulations and rules in cities, and I think it's because cities have a lot more varieties of income that come into the city besides just tourism. So it's one of those things where cities are a prime target for new regulations. Now, you may think that the best place to invest in is a market with no regulation at all, and that is a huge mistake. That's right, a huge mistake. Why is that? Because you want at least some regulations in the market you're participating in, because you know that the city government or the county government has thought about short-term rentals and responded to it. It's less likely that if there are already rules in place that they're going to increase the rules than a place that has no rules at all of a sudden introducing new rules. That is a game changer. Markets with no regulations or rules or ordinances regarding short-term rentals frankly scare me, because those are markets where there will be regulation coming in the future. There's no question about it. It's just, what is it going to look like? And it's a really unknown quantity. Do you want to buy a property in a place that you're not really sure what the regulations are going to look like, versus a place that already has regulations, so you already know what the rules are? Sure, they could change the rules in the future, but if they already have rules in place, the likelihood of that happening probably isn't as high. Areas that tend to be pretty safe in this regard are traditional vacation areas, areas that have 50 to 100 years of families visiting them every single year and rely heavily on tourism, are more than likely not going to have very onerous rules when it comes to short-term rental investing. And also, more regulations doesn't need to be all negative. There can be a big positive to it, in that perhaps they have a limit to the number of short-term rentals that can be in a market, and you're one of those properties. And more regulation could actually mean less competition for you as a host, because new entrants find it more difficult to get into that market. And that's a good thing for you. So it's not all negative. So how do you find out what these rules are? I would first start out by going to Google and just looking for your city or your town that you're looking into, and putting ordinances, short-term rentals or short-term rental rules, or kind of looking through that to see what you can find. One important tip here is do not rely on a realtor's opinion or somebody else's opinion about what their regulations are like, unless they're a very experienced short-term rental investor in that market. They may or may not have accurate information, and if it's not accurate and you went ahead and bought a property there and realized later that you just cannot launch a short-term rental there, that's going to be very costly for you. And if you're getting serious about it, you're like, I think this can work, I think this market can work, then be sure to contact the city and the county, because that's usually where the rules are going to sit, and ask them, are there any short-term rental rules or ordinances in this area that I need to be aware of? They're the source of truth as to what's permitted and what's not. And when you talk to the city or the county, make sure to ask them about any permits and what the permitting process is. Are there any short-term rental licenses that you must apply for? What's the chance of you being able to get one in the first place? How long will it take to apply and get the permit? What limits will you have as a host once you have a permit? And even things like, okay, if you're out of compliance, what's the penalty? What can happen? All these scenarios you should really think about and understand, before you 100% dive into a particular market and purchase a property. And another good thing to do is to get a sense for what the direction is in terms of regulations in that market. Are there pending ordinances or pending regulation in front of city council? You can find some of that out by going to Facebook groups for that area that have short-term rental investors and just start asking around. Are there people that know what's going on in the city? You could contact other short-term rental operators in that city directly to see what their experience is like. Or you could even identify real estate investment association meeting that you can attend, or find out about an organization that defends the rights of short-term rental owners in that area to really help you get educated. No one likes to talk about rules and regulations, but it's a fact that you have to operate within these rules. And if you don't know them before you walk into a market, that's really dangerous. Number 2 is good demand and tourism. Now you may think, well, I want to find an untapped market, one that people don't really know about. Well, if it's truly untapped, maybe it's because there's not a lot of demand to go to that place. If there's a strong demand in a certain market that you're looking at, that's a great sign, because that means that those could be potential guests for you. And it's also a big positive because it tells you that there's a short-term rental industry set up in that market. There are cleaners, there are handymen, there are contractors that are used to working with short-term rentals, which is huge. It's something that you're going to have to think about when you set up your team, and having that kind of an advantage is really valuable. Now, assuming there's strong demand in the area you're looking at, you'll want to find out exactly what's drawing people to that market. Yes, it may be obvious, if you're on a beach, it's the beach that's bringing people, or on a lake, it's the lake, or it's mountains, so maybe it's skiing. But getting a little more granular and finding what's really drawing people to that area is important, especially when you go to look for a property. For example, we have a log cabin on Lake Norman, just north of Charlotte. And yes, people come for the lake. That's primarily why they go there. But the Lake Norman area is also known for NASCAR. That area is known as the headquarters of NASCAR racing really across the country. So there's a lot of drivers there, a lot of people that come to that area to serve the NASCAR industry, which is a big draw to that area too. There's also various large festivals that happen throughout the year. So it pays to know what's drawing people to that market, because that's really going to be valuable for you when you go to look for a property in the future. Hey, real quick, are you liking this video? Please click the Si Senor button, because YouTube will then know this is valuable content and will share it with other immigrants. Now back to the video. Number 3, how expensive is the market? One obvious question is, how much money are you going to have to spend to really be competitive in that market? To know this, you're going to need to know ahead of time what type of property you're going to be buying. How many bedrooms, how many baths? That kind of an idea is really going to help you understand what it's going to cost to get in there. This comes out of doing research. You're going to have to look into how much revenue could I potentially earn with a property that has great design, great amenities, assuming you're going to do that. And how do you figure this out? Well, there's several tools that you can use online. AirDNA is probably the most popular one, but there are others called STR Insights and some other ones that are potentially out there that you could utilize to find that kind of information. I happen to use AirDNA for all sorts of research, and it's worth you looking into potentially using it to do research if you're looking into getting to a certain market. For example, you might decide that after you've done your research, you find out that maybe 5-6 bedroom properties are the ones that make the most revenue and have the least competition, and you think that's an area where you can really succeed in. The problem is that's also probably one of the more expensive properties in that market. Let's say they start at $1 million. You need to think about the down payment, the closing costs, the furniture, design services if you hire them out. It can all add up pretty quick. So you really have to figure out, with that number that you have in mind, is that something you can realistically do in that market? In the future, I'm going to be talking about what it costs to purchase a short-term rental and to run it, so to help you kind of figure this out on your own. Number 4, how much supply? Now, I probably wouldn't have mentioned this a year or two ago, but the fact of the matter is we're sitting right here recording this in spring of 2024, and supply of short-term rentals has really increased across the country. Demand has also increased across the board, for sure, but I think supply has increased faster in many markets, which is leading to lower occupancies for owners, for hosts. And that's where a lot of the Airbnb, social media posts and hashtags and everything is coming from this phenomenon that we're seeing. Now, I personally am not concerned about high supply, because if you can create a great short-term rental property, you can succeed even in an area with high supply, but you really have to nail your property. Now, there are some markets that I personally would probably avoid. Those that have gotten a lot of headlines over the years, like the Smokies and Joshua Tree, have really become hard to compete in. You could potentially succeed in these markets, don't get me wrong, but the bar is set really, really high, so you really have to nail it. And if you're new, this is a big challenge. The great news here is that there are many markets around the country that are not talked about in social media that could be great markets for you to go into. I also want to address how close you are to the property. Is this a factor? I'll admit, when I started in this path, I thought that I had to be fairly close to the property for this to work. But as I've been managing our property in North Carolina, which is about 6 hours away from us, I frankly have lost that notion. Really, a short-term rental can be anywhere in the country if you've got a good team locally. That's the key. And we do have a great team, so it works out well for us. So in the beginning of this video, I made sort of a teaser comment about what is one factor that you need to be thinking about that many people probably don't talk about too much. And what that is this property 100% financially focused property, or is this meant to be a lifestyle asset? For example, say you and your family love to go to the beach, and let's say you love to go to Hilton Head, and that's your spot. Are you looking for a place in Hilton Head, let's say, that you can stay at for some weeks during the year, but rent out the rest of the time? And maybe your goal is not to maximize profitability per se. Maybe it's more to just cover your mortgage costs, and that's very fair. And that kind of a factor, whether it's purely financially focused or it's a personal asset, is something that you need to think about. And if it's more of a personal asset, then some of the things that I mentioned aren't quite as important as what I just talked about. But if it's financially focused, definitely they are. So if you're excited about picking a new market and starting to look for a property, I want to share with you 3 critical things that I believe you need to have to be successful in the short-term rental business. If you want to check that out, just click right here. Thank you for watching the Immigrant Wealth channel.